The night the cold street suns grabbed the wrong girl, the rain came down in thin silver threads that made Main Street look like a reel from the old days, neon flicker over the diner. The pharmacy clock stuck 10 minutes slow. The bus bench with that peeling ad for a roofing company whose number everybody had memorized long ago. In a town like Milford, you come to know the sounds that mean nothing and the ones that mean everything. A screen door claps, a freight horn moans, and sometimes a van door slams, the kind of slam that says somebody just chose the wrong path. Emily Hart didn't think of paths. She thought of her feet sore from a 12-hour shift at St. Agnes Children's. A styrofoam cup of diner coffee she shouldn't drink at 11:20 p.m. And her father's beat-up pickup with a temperamental starter that always took 2 tries. She wore a grey raincoat, same shade as half the coats in town if you asked her, and she kept her hospital badge clipped to her scrub top because she'd be back by 6 a.m. anyway. People who work in pediatrics learn to budget hope like cash. A little here, a little there, never run out before morning. The sun set 2 booths over tattoos, like county maps, up there next to the leader doing that thing where he speaks without moving his mouth as if words might spill and stain. They watched Emily not like wolves. Wolves have rules, but like boys who never learned them. When she stepped into the alley with her coffee, they stepped too. Rain made the bricks shine. The dumpster smelled like wet cardboard and orange peels. Emily kept her hands out where folks could see them, an old habit from night shifts. Show your fingers, show you mean peace. Wrong coat, the one with the baseball cap said. Wrong night. I'm a nurse, Emily said, steady voice she used for mothers at 3 a.m. There are a lot of grey coats. Not this one, he said, and the other 3 tightened the circle. Back in Dale's diner, an old man in a VFW jacket set down his fork. Mr. Whittaker had been sitting at the corner booth since before the county put up the Vietnam plaque out front. He'd buried a wife and 2 best friends, taught his grandsons how to change a tire with a 4-way lug wrench, and still wrote checks for the church roof fund with a fountain pen. He watched through the rain-sloshed window as the men eased the girl toward a cargo van with a door that liked to thunk instead of click. He didn't reach for 911. He reached for a folded slip of paper in his wallet, thin, from years of carry crease like a map of a better place. VetNet. 10 names, 10 numbers. You call the first, and if Providence has a mind to the rest, will ring themselves. Claire, he said, when the line picked up voice low, same as he'd use, to soothe a skittish horse. It's Wit, Ellie behind Dale's. 4 boys, with more muscle than manners, took a young lady in a grey coat. They'll run the river road. I reckon your column isn't bedded down yet. Captain Claire Mercer, National Guard, early 40s boots still wet from convoy drills, sat in a Humvee not 3 miles away. She had the kind of command voice that could quiet a gymnasium and the kind of laugh that made you think of summer campfires. She looked across the bench seat at Sergeant Rosa Delgado and raised 2 fingers. Rosa nodded and toggled the radio. Copy, Wit, Claire said. We're rolling quiet. I'll notify the sheriff. Lights when we've got a cordon. Until then, we're ghosts. She paused softer. You stay in the light, you hear. I know my place, Wit said, and slipped the paper back beside the photo of his Martha in her Sunday hat. Engines spool up, muted chatter on radio. Inside the van, Emily tried to memorize turns the way she taught anxious kids to count breaths, 3 streets, 1 stop sign the bump when the pavement changed from county to city patchwork. She could smell old oil and wet rope. The kid nearest her coughed a tight, wheezy sound. Emily turned her head just enough to be human. Breathe in slow through your nose, she said. Out slower through your mouth. You got an inhaler. Shut up, the cab said. She's not wrong, Mace, the kid muttered, but softer than his bravado asked for. They parked where every small-town bad idea hides the derelict river warehouse, with broken panes and a rumor of ghosts. The men pushed her toward a scarred work table under a string of buzzing bulbs. No heating, just crowding, the kind of pressure that makes some people break and other people clearer. You talk to the police, Mace said. I talk to mothers with sick babies, Emily said. Sometimes the deputies bring them. Don't be clever. She didn't answer. Clever didn't help in a ward at 2 a.m. What helped was tone and timing and the belief that 10 seconds can be long enough to change a thing. Out on Cole Street, 4 Humvees slid through the rain with their running lights off, followed by 8 more engines like a distant storm. The sheriff's cruisers peeled off side streets to close the gap's radios cross-talking in that professional murmur only old men and dispatchers can translate. Claire's voice cut clean across it. Outer cordon set, inner hailing team on me, medic stage behind the blue dumpster, deputies cover the rail spur, non-lethal posture until we're forced off it. Rosa took the bullhorn without fanfare. Cole Street Warehouse, this is the county sheriff and the National Guard. We're here to end this safely. Put weapons on the floor, step back from the girl, palms out. Nobody wants a tragedy tonight. The warehouse windows went from black to mirror bright as Humvee headlights hummed on. Rain turned to a white veil between here and there. Emily felt the shift you feel when grown-ups walk into a room that's gotten out of hand. It doesn't fix anything by itself, but it tells you fixing is now possible. Who is she? One of the boys hissed. Why all this for some nurse? Mace watched the shadows move in the light. He had risen fast on posture and luck. His luck had always held until the very second it didn't. He could do the math. 50 soldiers, deputies who knew every angle of the old building. An officer at the front, female chin, high hand up, in a gesture that meant, I am the pause that saves you from yourself. Boss the Wheezy kid said, thumb, rubbing the seam of his jeans. This ain't the one we were supposed to grab. Coat's right, but she's not. Shut it, Mace snapped, but he knew. The informant talked too loud and wore her hair different. This one had a hospital badge and eyes like somebody who sleeps 4 hours because people need her the other 20. Claire stepped to the threshold where rain died and dust began. She didn't shout. The bullhorn was for distance, not respect. My name is Captain Claire Mercer, she said. I'm here with the sheriff. I know who you are and what you think you're holding. You made a mistake. We can correct a mistake. We can't unwind a catastrophe. Silence inside except for the roof drip and somebody's breath. Triggered the hot-headed one with the ego, and the fresh ink click-clacked around to prove he was important. Everyone flinched, even his own. Easy, Claire said, eyes never leaving Mace. You baseball cap, you know your choices. You can decide how this ends. It can end with handcuffs and lawyers. It can end with ambulances. It can end with funerals. Only one of those lets you call your mother tomorrow. When you talk to men like Mace, you don't talk about right and wrong. You talk about dawn. Emily moved her wrist so her bracelet threw a fleck of light toward the door seam. Little signals save people who are paying attention. Claire saw it and cut her palm a fraction. Hold your line, kid. We've got you. The wheezy kid coughed again. Emily nodded the breathing cue. In through your nose, she whispered. Out longer. Ma'am, he said to nobody, I ain't cut for this. You're cut for more than this, Emily said. Trigger's jaw worked. I say we take the nurse through the back and make a trade. Mace looked at the lights spilling past the stacks of pallets like daylight had come early. He'd once walked out of a bar fight because a guy with nothing to lose smiled too wide. He'd always trusted that sense. Now it told him the woman at the door wasn't bluffing. and the world beyond that door had already made up its mind about him. The only mind that could be changed was his. He put his pistol on the table, not gently, not dramatically, just decided. "Hands," Claire said, and Mace lifted them palms toward heaven, like a man who remembered a lesson from a better day. Trigger swore, but he felt the room slip and couldn't find a grip. When he wrecked the slide the second time, the sound rang wrong, like a hammer falling on the thumb. Emily turned her face to him. "Sir," she said with the same voice she used for stubborn fathers in triage, "your hands are shaking. That's fear talking, not strength. Strong men don't shoot when they're scared. They breathe and they wait for their minds to come back." He looked at her like she'd slapped him and then very slowly put the gun down. The wheezy kid's shoulders fell 3 inches in a kind of relief he'd be ashamed to admit later. "Good choice," Claire said, and motioned with 2 fingers. Velcro rip, boots on concrete, cuffs click. The entry team flowed away, water figures out a stream bed, over around, never smashing what didn't need smashing. Emily felt a blanket around her shoulders before she realized she was shaking. A medic's hand checked the pulse, and she swatted it away gently. "Kids first," she always said, even when she was the one to be checked. Old habits. Claire stood framed by light and rain. She looked like every coach who ever told you to square your shoulders and be who your parents raised you to be. "Ma'am," she said to Emily, "you did hard things right just now." "People do hard things every night where I work," Emily said. "I just borrowed some of their courage." Mace glanced sideways at the wheezy kid. Emily stepped as she passed and pressed something into his hand, a spare inhaler cap from her pocket. Useless by itself, symbolic as a flag. "You're better than this," she said, "if you want to be." He nodded without meaning to. Some words sit in your pocket until the day you need them. Some save you just because they were offered. By sunrise, the headlines would try to make it bigger than it was and smaller. No shots fired in Milford standoff. To the older men at Dale's, it would just be a story about neighbors doing jobs with honor. To the kids who watched from porches with phones, it would be a clip they'd replay until the rain looked like glitter. To Emily's father, who arrived red-eyed and shameless about it, it would be the longest hug of his life. The one where he said, "I'm proud," and meant proud and grateful and sorry for every argument about curfews you ever had. The sheriff held a press conference under an awning that leaked on the left if you stood just wrong. He believed in handshakes and second chances, and he said both. Charges would stick where they ought to. Others would bend towards something useful. The county's apprenticeship program, the EMT track, the community college had been begging for bodies to fill. A couple boys would end up learning to weld. One, if he kept practicing breathing, might learn to manage airways for strangers on the worst nights of their lives. Out in the guard lot, Claire wrote the commendation paperwork because the army likes its forms. Rosa caught her hand before she signed. "You know," Rosa said, "they'll put your name up on a plaque for this." Claire shrugged. "Names fade. What matters is no mother cried about a son tonight." Rosa nodded, and a whole town learned the sound of help. Daybirds start, coffee pours, a diner bell pings. On Sunday, the church read a psalm about rescue, and Whit stood at his usual spot in the back head, off in the doorway, because his mama raised him right. After service, the pastor put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did a brave thing." Whit shook his head. "I did an old thing. I called a friend. Sometimes the Lord lets that be enough." The week rolled the way weeks do in towns with more chores than drama. St. Agnes buzzed. The diner ran out of pie on Wednesday because someone forgot to call the bakery. The auto club met behind Pete's and argued about which socket set was the best craftsman or the one from the farm store. And down at the river warehouse, the county trucks fixed the dark street lights painted over graffiti and mounted a camera high where teenagers couldn't throw a rock at it. Emily walked by on her day off and thought how light changes everything you think you know about a place. Then she kept walking to the park because on her days off, she tried to remember the color of green. You don't wrap stories like this with a bow. They don't end, they open. 6 months later, the community college auto bay smelled like oil and hope. A dozen young men and 3 young women zipped blue coveralls and learned how to treat a torque spec like a promise. The EMT class met on the other side of the cinder block wall practicing with plastic airways and real concentration. The wheezy kid angel, he told Emily sheepish one afternoon, when he showed up to help paint the pediatric waiting room, watched her demonstrate the recovery position. He nodded as if he'd always known it. He hadn't. The first call he rode with his preceptor happened to be Dale's, where an old farmer at table 3 forgot to eat, and then remembered too fast. Angel managed the airway like a man who knew the difference between panic and purpose. After he sat on the tailgate of the rig and stared at his hands like they belonged to somebody he wanted to meet. Emily's father came by St. Agnes with a jar of pickles that didn't seal right. "If you don't mind," he said to the nurses, "I'll leave these in your break room. Don't tell anyone they're mine if they like them." Captain Claire spoke once at the high school assembly about service. She didn't show videos. She didn't pass out flyers. She told the kids about the night rain makes you think and how leadership sometimes looks like a raised palm and a quiet voice. She said the words that stuck to the cinder block strength is keeping people safe. Anything else is show. That night at Dale's, Wit slid into his booth and found an envelope under the salt shaker. Inside was a hand-drawn card from a patient at St. Agnes, a stick figure with a grey coat and a giant red heart, and next to her a boxy car with big tires and 50 little stick figures all waving. Under it in wobbly letters, "Thank you for calling your friend." Witt smiled and tucked it beside Martha. In his wallet, the folded paper with the 10 names had gotten soft again. He left it that way. Some tools you don't oil. You let time make them tender. Out by the river, the warehouse lights did their new job stitching the dark to the day with a decent seam. The town slept better, not because nothing bad would ever happen again. Older Americans know better than to wish for that, but because they'd remembered how to show up right. A nurse made a boy breathe. An officer held a line. An old man made a call. A captain lifted her hand, and the night obeyed. If you're listening to this and thinking of a time you mistook someone's coat for their story, or a time you almost acted before your mind caught up, well, you're in good company. Most of us are better in the second draft. Share this with somebody who needs a reminder that courage is ordinary and help is loud when it needs to be. And if stories like this steady your hands the way coffee steadies mine, you'll find more at this same little corner of the dial next week. Until then, breathe in slow out slower and keep a number in your wallet worth calling.